Every morning, I woke before the sun. The kitchen was always cold at that hour, the tile unkind to my bare feet. But I didn't mind. I had done this for over 40 years. Boil the water, warm the bread. Eggs 3 ways, coffee strong for my son, light for his wife. I didn't ask what they wanted. I already knew, because knowing was what I did best. They sat, they ate, they left. The same routine every day. Plates scraped clean, cups half full, crumbs on the table. And me, still standing by the sink washing dishes as their laughter faded down the hall. No thank you. No glance back. Just the clatter of footsteps and the sound of the television clicking on in the other room. I told myself it didn't matter, that my job was to serve, that being useful was love. But that morning, everything changed. I heard it from the hallway. They didn't know I was nearby. Didn't realize I was wiping the counter just behind the wall. She's always in the way, my daughter-in-law muttered. I know, my son replied. She doesn't do anything anymore. I stopped breathing. In that moment, the rag in my hand might as well have been a brick. I had just spent 2 hours cooking, cleaning, folding their clothes. And they said I did nothing. Worse, that I was in the way. The quiet hurt the most. I didn't cry. I didn't storm in. I didn't even let the dish in my hand clatter into the sink. Instead, I finished wiping the counter, folded the towel in half, and placed it gently on the rack. My hands moved out of habit. But my heart, it had stopped moving. And in that eerie stillness, a voice inside me, one I hadn't heard in years, whispered, "You've disappeared," and they didn't even notice. But I noticed. And that was the beginning. That night, after the dishes were done and the lights were low, I sat in my small room at the back of the house. I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside was a journal I hadn't touched in 10 years. I flipped to a blank page, and I wrote, "They called me useless, but I'm the reason their world runs. And maybe it's time I stopped running it." I closed the book. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a match waiting to be struck. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. I didn't brew the coffee, didn't toast the bread, didn't set the table with the white cloth they liked. And something miraculous happened. They noticed, "Mom, are you okay?" My son peeked into the kitchen, confused. The kitchen was clean, yes, but still, no smells, no sounds, no me fluttering about like some invisible housekeeper. "I'm fine," I said, sitting calmly at the table with a cup of tea. He looked puzzled, like I'd suddenly changed species. "You didn't make breakfast?" "No," I said softly. "I was resting." You know, like people do when they're not useful anymore. He didn't know what to say, so he left. And I stayed. I pulled out old photos that night. In the quiet of my room, I opened a faded shoebox. Inside, a picture of me in college laughing in a library, a snapshot of me and Paul on our honeymoon hair, wild from the wind, a photo of me holding my newborn son, him eyes wide with awe. I stared at that one for a long time. "You were everything to me," I whispered. "But somewhere along the way, I became nothing to you." They thought I was always this quiet gray thing, but I had once been fire. I had danced barefoot in the rain. I had protested in the streets for things I believed in. I had loved hard and lost deeply. And now I was expected to be happy ironing their pants, folding their napkins, saying nothing, being invisible. But something had cracked open when I heard them call me useless. And now I couldn't unhear it. I wrote a list called "The Things I Will No Longer Do." I will no longer cook for those who do not thank me. I will no longer clean messes made by people who see me as one. I will no longer make myself small so others can feel large. I will no longer disappear quietly. And last on the list, I will no longer forget who I am. That morning, I pulled my old sewing machine from the closet. It still had dust in the corners, the kind of fine gray that settles when something hasn't been touched in years. Like memory, I plugged it in. The motor still hummed. The sound startled me, loud, defiant, alive. A sharp contrast to the silence I had become accustomed to. I smiled. "You still work?" I whispered, running my fingers across its chipped enamel. "Just like me." I sewed myself a new apron. It wasn't for cooking. It was a symbol, a declaration. I chose a bright red fabric with sunflowers that refused to be ignored. I stitched every seam with quiet rebellion. When I wore it into the kitchen later that day, Emily, my oldest granddaughter, stared. "That's new," she said. "So am I," I answered. They thought my life began when theirs did. But I had dreams once, and names they didn't even know. I had been a poet who read her work aloud in smoky cafes, a painter who once sold a piece to a stranger on a park bench, a woman who could drive cross-country with only a thermos and a map, all buried under casseroles and calendars and school pickups. And the more I remembered, the angrier I became. I started writing my story on the walls, quietly, not with paint, with Post-it notes, on the mirror. "You are not a shadow," on the fridge, The hands that feed are not invisible. Inside the cabinet where I kept their vitamins, before you were born, I mattered. They didn't ask, not yet, but I saw them notice. And that was enough for now. Emily found my college thesis. It was tucked inside an old binder marked recipes. She had been looking for my banana bread formula. She handed it to me confused. "Grandma, you wrote about women's roles in generational memory." "Yes," I smiled, before I started forgetting myself. She sat down beside me cross-legged on the floor. And for the first time in years, someone asked, "Can you tell me more?" It was a quiet Sunday. They had all gathered in the living room, my son, his wife, the 2 grandchildren. Usually, I floated around the edges like steam off a kettle there, but vanishing. But this time, I sat with them, not beside them, not behind them, right there on the sofa. And I didn't bring snacks. I didn't offer tea. I didn't wait to be needed. I simply existed. At first, they didn't know what to do. My daughter-in-law glanced my way, confused. My son cleared his throat. "Do you want something, Mom?" "Yes," I said. They waited. "I want to be seen." There was a pause. Not dramatic, not explosive, just the kind of silence that sits between people who suddenly realize they've overlooked something essential. I told them the truth gently but firmly, I said. "I cook, I clean, I iron your clothes and keep this house standing. And yet, you call me useless." Their eyes widened. "I heard you, weeks ago, in the hallway. You said I don't do anything anymore." My son looked horrified. "Mom, I didn't mean..." I raised my hand. "Stop. This isn't about an apology. This is about me remembering me, and you learning who I really am." Then I brought out the box photos, journals, poems, letters, newspaper clippings, my thesis, my first sewing competition ribbon. This is who I was. This is who I am. Emily reached for one of the journals. "You wrote every day." "Almost," I said, even when no one saw me. She read aloud. "I am not the dishes I wash. I am not the silence after dinner. I am not your shadow. I am not your shame." There were tears in her eyes, not guilt recognition. And then something changed. They listened. Not just nodded, listened. And when dinner time came, no one asked me to cook. Instead, they asked me to talk. They asked about how I met their grandfather, what I dreamed of, what I still dream of. For the first time in years, I wasn't furniture. I wasn't Grandma bring me that. I was a woman. I was me. And I was done fading. The next morning, I got dressed deliberately. Not in my usual soft blues and faded florals. Today, I wore crimson, a bold color, one they hadn't seen on me in years. I brushed my hair back, pinned it like I used to when I was 30, and looked in the mirror not to adjust anything, but to acknowledge someone me. I didn't ask permission. I didn't explain. I just grabbed my bag, my notebook, and walked out the front door. The library still had my card. It took them a moment to find it in the back files. "It's been a while," the young woman at the desk smiled. I smiled back. "Yes, but I've been writing stories in my head all this time. Now I need some new ones." I walked the aisles slowly, running my fingers across spines like old friends. The smell of books, the hush, the peace. And suddenly I belonged again. Not as someone's mother or housekeeper, but as a reader, a writer, a witness to life. I signed up for a workshop. There was a flyer posted, Writing Through the Second Half of Life. A memoir workshop for women 60+. My hand trembled a little when I called the number. But I did it. "Hello, this is Joan. I'm interested in the workshop." "Wonderful," a woman's voice replied. "We'd love to have you. Do you have any writing experience?" I paused, looked down at the leather-bound journal in my lap, the one filled with years of silent lines. "Yes," I said, more than anyone ever knew. I sat among women like me. That first meeting felt like coming home in a way my own house never had. Women with silver hair and stories behind every wrinkle. We read aloud to one another, laughing, crying, nodding silently. And when it was my turn, I shared this. I cooked and cleaned every day, and they still called me useless. But I was never useless. I was unseen. And now I refused to remain invisible. The room was quiet, not out of discomfort, out of reverence. They saw me, really saw me. For the first time in decades, I felt new. That night walking home, I didn't take the usual route. I let the wind touch my face. Let my feet choose turns without logic. Let myself feel free. No one called me grandma on that walk. No one asked what was for dinner. No one handed me a stain to scrub or a story to listen to without ever telling one back. And you know what? I didn't miss any of that, because I had finally started telling my story, and it was just beginning. When I returned from my writing workshop that evening, something was different. The kitchen was clean. No dishes in the sink, no crumbs on the counter, no sticky mugs left on the table. It felt intentional, as if someone had finally seen the mess I used to clean without complaint and decided not to make it. I didn't say a word. I just stood in the doorway watching. And then I heard it. "Grandma's home," Emily whispered from the living room, smiling. Not the maid's back, not what's for dinner. Just Grandma, like I was someone who mattered. Emily had something in her hands. She walked up to me shy, but eager. "I wrote something, after reading your poems." I blinked, surprised. She handed me a sheet of notebook paper. It was still warm from her hands. At the top it said, "Ode to a woman we forgot to ask about." I read each line slowly, my throat tightening with each word. She had written about my hands, my quiet footsteps, my journal pages she found. She had even rhymed sunlight with second sight. And she ended with, "You weren't useless. You were the foundation. And now I want to know more." My son stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he cleared his throat. "I found some of your old paintings in the attic. I didn't know you used to do that." I looked at him and shrugged, half smiling. "You never asked." He lowered his eyes. Not ashamed, more like humbled. Maybe I should have. Maybe I still can. And in that moment, I saw the little boy in him again. The one who used to bring me wildflowers and call me his best girl. That boy had just found his mother again. I started sharing my life at the dinner table, not serving. Sharing. I told them stories from before they were born. About the first protest I marched in. The first poem I published. The night I broke off an engagement before meeting their grandfather. They listened like I was a legend. Like I had come down from a mountain with forgotten wisdom. And I realized something powerful. They couldn't see me until I remembered how to speak. I didn't raise my voice, but I raised myself. And in doing so, I lifted something in them too. Respect, curiosity, memory. I wasn't a ghost in the kitchen anymore. I was a living archive, a walking novel, a matriarch. They didn't say sorry with words. They said it with space. With silence that invited me in. With questions instead of assumptions. And every answer I gave was like lighting a candle where there had only been shadow. It started with a flyer I pinned at the library. Just 6 words written in bold ink. Invisible no more. Women 60+ circle. Tuesdays 5 p.m. Meeting room B. I wasn't sure anyone would come, but I hoped. And hope, like faith, like fire, has a way of attracting others who carry the same quiet flame. The first meeting, only 2. Came Linda, who had been a school teacher for 35 years. Her children only called when they needed babysitting. And Teresa, a widow who had spent 4 decades hosting family dinners, only to now eat frozen meals alone. They looked around the empty room uncertain. I poured tea. We sat in a circle of folding chairs. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say," Linda mumbled. "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "You just have to exist and be seen." Her eyes welled up. Not because of pain, but because someone finally gave her permission to take up space. We shared without politeness. We didn't smile when we didn't feel like it. We didn't nod to agree if we disagreed. We didn't serve tea unless we wanted to. And somehow that honesty became sacred. Teresa shared how her son moved his new wife into her home and slowly made Teresa feel like the guest. Linda confessed she sometimes walked into the grocery store just to feel around people, even if no one spoke to her. I read one of my poems about cooking for a table that never looked up. They cried, I cried, and in that crying we healed a little. By week 4, we had a full circle 10 women now, all different, all forgotten in their own ways, all rediscovering themselves. We brought stories, old songs, photos of who we used to be and who we wanted to become next, because that was the radical truth we were now embracing. We're not done. They started calling me the Spark. It was half joke, half truth. But every time someone said it, I sat a little straighter, because I realized something profound. The world may try to retire women like us, push us into the quiet, call us spent, worn, done, but we carry centuries in our hands. We are the ones who remember, who rebuild, who resurrect. It was Linda's idea. "Why don't we put on a show?" she said one Tuesday evening, her cheeks flushed with nervous excitement. We laughed at first, a show at our age. But then Teresa added, "Why not people need to hear us, really hear us?" And just like that, what began as a whisper became a spark. We called it Still Here, a community storytelling night. One evening, one stage, 10 women, 10 stories. We rented the church hall down the street. Nothing fancy folding chairs, a mic, some string lights. But it was ours. I designed the flyer. Emily helped me post about it online. My son printed programs. "You're performing?" he asked. "Not performing," I replied. "Proclaiming." He didn't fully understand, but he smiled and said, "I'll be there." The room was packed. Neighbors' friends, curious onlookers. Even the mayor came. His assistant said it was good for community engagement. They expected sweet anecdotes, a few soft chuckles, maybe a recipe or two. They didn't expect truth that cracked like thunder. Linda spoke first, telling the story of being laid off at 58 and never finding work again, then starting a tutoring group from her porch. Another woman shared how she buried her identity under motherhood and was only now reclaiming her love for sculpture. And then it was my turn. I took the stage without my apron. I wore my red sunflower dress, the one I'd sewn the day I chose to be seen. I stepped up hands steady, and I said, I cooked, I cleaned, I kept everyone's world spinning, and one day they called me useless. Gasps, stillness. But now I write, I lead, I live, and I'm no one's ghost. There was silence, then tears, then a standing ovation that shook something loose in the floorboards and in my soul. We became a movement, not just a circle. Local papers covered it. The community center offered us a monthly slot. More women joined. But most importantly, our families changed. Sons listened. Daughters sat closer. Grandchildren asked questions not out of obligation, but wonder. We weren't just grandma anymore. We were voices. We were history. We were future. We were power. The letter, I thought I'd burned it, came on a Thursday. Folded in an envelope with faded corners and my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in over 30 years. My hands trembled before I even opened it, because I knew who it was from. James, the man I loved before my husband. The one I almost ran away with. The one I wrote poems for, then buried deep beneath motherhood and routine. We hadn't spoken since I chose safety over passion. Inside the envelope was a single letter. Joan, I heard about your story night. My niece showed me the video. You lit up that stage like I remember. I don't expect anything, just wanted you to know. I never forgot you. Jay. I sat there for hours, just holding the page. My past and present were touching in the same space. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt wonder. What if the parts of us we put away don't disappear? What if they wait quietly, patiently, until we're ready to pick them back up? That night, I didn't sleep. I reread my old journals, the ones with Jay scribbled in the margins. I found the poem I never sent him. You were the match, I was the rain. But even rain learns to catch fire in the right light. I didn't tell anyone yet. Some memories need to marinate before they're shared. Some truths need to breathe. But I did something I hadn't done in decades. I wrote back. Not for closure, not for drama, but because I finally had a voice again. And I wanted to use it not just for the world, but for me. Dear Jay, I remember the match, and I've become the flame. I mailed it the next day. I didn't feel like I was cheating on my past. I felt like I was reclaiming it. Because sometimes the parts of our story we bury are the exact ones that still belong in our next chapter. And Grandma, she's not just a grandmother anymore. She's a woman rediscovering her own wild, unfinished story. The day he showed up at my workshop, it was a regular Tuesday. We had tea, fresh scones, and a full circle of women buzzing with stories. I had just stood to introduce a new member when I heard a cough at the back of the room. I turned, and there he was. James, 30 years older, a little stooped, a little slower. But those eyes, still the same, still searching, still soft. No one knew who he was, but I did. He didn't interrupt, didn't wave or call my name. He just stood there by the door with a notebook in hand, like any other curious newcomer. I found my voice. Everyone, I said gently, we have a guest today. He nodded, stepped forward. I'm James, he said. I heard there was a room here where stories live. And just like that, he sat beside the women who had unknowingly carried my secret. After the session, we walked down the sidewalk past the garden where the first wildflowers of spring were beginning to bloom. You got my letter, he said. I did, I replied, and I wrote back. He smiled. I know, that's why I came. We didn't talk about the past, not right away. We talked about the present, the books we'd read, the poems we'd written, the silences we had survived. And then he said something I'll never forget. You're more you than I've ever seen you. I didn't feel 74. I felt timeless. He walked me home, didn't ask to come inside, just stood on the porch like a gentleman from another life. I'm staying in town a few weeks, he said. No pressure, just thought you should know. And then he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded page. This is yours, a poem, the last one I wrote and never sent. He walked away before I could open it. I waited until the door closed behind me, then unfolded it like something holy. It read, You were never a whisper. You were the chorus I kept humming when the world turned gray. I cried, but not because I was sad. I cried because for the first time in decades, I felt fully seen. Not as a role, not as a duty, but as a soul. And at that moment, I knew something vital. Love doesn't expire, it just waits for us to be ready again. And maybe, just maybe, I was. Who is that man, Grandma? It was inevitable. James and I had shared a few coffee's quiet walks, and even laughed like we used to when time was short and the world was wide. Then, one Sunday afternoon, he dropped me off after our usual garden stroll. Emily saw him. She peeked through the window and later whispered, "Grandma, who's the man with the silver hair? The one who makes you laugh like you're 30? I smiled. A friend, an old friend who once knew me before I became everyone's everything. But it didn't stay a whisper. That evening, my son called. His voice was careful, too careful. Mom, Emily mentioned. Someone, a man. Who is he? Someone from my past, someone kind. A pause. Then, "You're sure this is a good idea? I mean, at your age." I cut him off gently but firmly. At my age, I know more about what I want than I ever did in my 20s. He didn't respond at first. Then came the heavy sigh, the one that always came before a surrender. "Okay, I don't want you to get hurt." "I've already been hurt, son," I said. "Now I'm learning how to heal." The family meeting, yes, they called one. Not dramatic, but awkward. My son, my daughter-in-law, even my grandson who looked more curious than concerned. "Are you dating him?" my daughter-in-law asked. "I'm not sure what to call it yet," I replied. "But I am enjoying the way he treats me like I matter." My grandson laughed. "Sounds like a keeper." The adults glared at him, but I smiled. "Thank you, Noah." Then I said something I hadn't planned, but knew was true. I didn't raise my voice all those years because I didn't think I was allowed to. But now I know silence is not the same as peace. They didn't fully understand, but they tried. They didn't cheer, they didn't celebrate, but they respected it. And in a strange way, that was more powerful. I had taught them something just by living differently. They saw me not as a fragile elder, but as a whole woman with unfinished stories and new beginnings. And honestly, that was all I ever wanted. James called that night. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than expected." "You sure I'm not causing a storm?" "You might be," I said. "But sometimes the soil needs a storm before it can bloom again." We laughed, and then we just listened to each other breathe. No pressure, no promises, just presence. The TV invitation that changed everything. It came in a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. I almost mistook it for one of those charity mailers until I read the return address. Channel 7, Stories That Move Us. Inside was a letter from the producer. "Dear Miss Joan, we saw the video of your storytelling night and were deeply moved. We'd love to invite you as a guest on our upcoming episode about rediscovery after 70. Your voice matters." Warmly, Grace Lynn, senior producer. My first instinct was to say no. The cameras, the lights, the idea of baring my heart in front of strangers on national television. Terrifying. But then I remembered, I had already done something scarier. I had told the truth in front of my community. I had shown my past self that silence would not win. I had loved again with all the risks it carried. So I called Grace. "I'll come," I said. "But only if I can say what really needs to be said." "That's exactly why we want you," she replied. On the day of the recording, they did my makeup, straightened my dress, attached a tiny microphone to my blouse. But nothing prepared me for the moment I walked onto that stage. A sea of lights, a quiet crowd, and a seat in the center waiting just for me. Grace smiled from behind the camera. "Whenever you're ready," I took a deep breath. "My name is Joan. I am 74. And for most of my life, I believed my worth was in the meals I cooked and the floors I cleaned." A murmur ran through the audience. I continued. But then I realized my story didn't end when I turned 60. It started when I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. The audience didn't just clap, they stood men. Women. Even the younger crew behind the cameras had tears in their eyes. One woman in the audience shouted, "Say it again, Grandma." And I did. You are not useless. You are not forgotten. You are not just your chores, your wrinkles, or your silence. You are still here, and the world needs your voice. When I got home, there were flowers on my porch from James, and a note. "You were always a fire. I'm just glad the world finally sees the light." I smiled, because something had changed not just in me, but in everyone who heard me speak. I wasn't just Grandma anymore. I was Joan Woman Warrior Witness. When the past knocked on my door again, it was dusk, the kind of golden hour that made the curtains glow and the living room feel like a memory. I was sipping tea, rereading one of James's poems when I heard the knock. Not the polite kind, not the neighborly kind, but sharp like a question with no patience for delay. I opened the door, and there she was. Margaret, my late husband's sister, the one who hadn't spoken to me since the funeral, the one who never approved of how fast I moved on. She looked straight at me and said, "We need to talk, now. Old grudges, new wounds." She walked in like she still owned a piece of this house, sat in the chair across from me without asking. "I saw you on TV," she said, "talking about your life, your pain, your rediscovery." I said nothing. I let her speak. "Did you even mourn him, Joan, my brother?" "Of course I did," I whispered. "I mourned him every night." "But mourning doesn't mean staying buried, too." She scoffed. "And this James, you parade him around like nothing ever happened. Like your vows didn't matter." The tipping point, I stood up, calmly. "Margaret, I cooked and cleaned for 40 years. I wiped tears no one saw. I smiled when I wanted to scream. And when he died, I lost more than a husband. I lost my script. But I did not lose my right to live again." She looked stunned. She didn't expect resistance. Then she said the thing that cut deepest. "You were just convenient." That's what my brother always said. The moment I finally let go, I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled. A sad smile, but a strong one. Maybe I was convenient. Maybe I made life easy. But now I make life honest. And if that's too much for you, Margaret, that's fine. But don't come into my home and ask me to shrink again. She stood up, mouth opening to say more, but said nothing. She walked out. And with that, a decades-old chain broke free from my heart. That night, I wrote a new poem, not for James, not for my family, just for me. You will call her difficult, because she dares to bloom in the graveyard you left her in. And when James called later, I told him everything. He said only one thing. You were never meant to be a secret, and I'm proud of the way you roar. The letter that asked me to lead 2 weeks passed. Life began to feel still again, not stagnant, just quiet. James and I walked the garden path. The family visited more often. I even got recognized once at the grocery store. "You're that grandma from the show." I laughed, until the letter came. It was from the national director of a Women's Resilience Foundation. "Dear Joan, we were moved by your story. We believe thousands of women over 60 need to hear a voice like yours. We're starting a speakers tour, and we want you to be our keynote." My first reaction, fear. What would I say? What if I messed up? What if the women didn't see themselves in me? But James said something simple. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be real. You've already done the hard part surviving. Now you just share it. So I said yes. And a few weeks later, I found myself standing on a stage in front of 200 women, most of them with silver hair and stories no one had asked about in years. The room that finally felt like home. I stood at the microphone, hands steady, voice warm. I used to believe my value came from how useful I was to others, how clean the house was, how quiet I could stay. But then I realized something, and I paused, looked at them all. Some were holding tissues. Some leaned forward like the next line might be the one that freed them. I was never useless. I was just unseen. What followed was a movement. They called it the Still Here Circle, a group for women over 60 who'd been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced. And every week more came, with journals, with tears, with quiet rage ready to turn into radiant freedom. We weren't a protest. We were a presence. And I was finally more than just a role. I was a voice, and that voice echoed in every woman who sat in those chairs and realized, it's not too late, I'm still here. That night, James held my hand. Longer, so he said, when's your next speech? Wherever they'll have me, I replied. He kissed my temple. Good, because they need you. And I thought to myself, so do I. The final chapter, but not the end. It was a quiet morning, the kind I used to fill with dishes and dusting. Now I filled it with tea writing and watching the light dance on my window like it had something to say. I had just returned from the 10th city on the tour. 10 cities. Thousands of women. Dozens of tears. Hundreds of hugs. And one unshakable truth. It was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who I had always been. The chair by the window. I sat in my favorite chair, the one I used to rest in after everyone had eaten and gone to their rooms. It used to feel like my hiding place. Now it felt like a throne. A place of power, of reflection, of return. I thought about everything. The years I spent being their shadow. The night I overheard the word useless. The quiet rebellion that began with a missed breakfast. The letter, the speech, the movement. And James. Oh, James. We got married, quietly, boldly. Just us, a few close friends, and a field of lavender. Do you take this firecracker of a woman? The officiant joked. Every day until the last breath, he said. We didn't promise to complete each other. We promised to witness one another. To say, I see you. And for a woman who had been invisible for so long, that meant everything. My granddaughter wrote me a letter. She's 12. Sharp, brave, curious. It read, Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be like you, not quiet but strong, not just nice but real. Thank you for showing me that stories don't end when you get older. Sometimes they finally begin. I cried reading it. Because that's what legacy is. Not the china I passed down, not the recipes, not the traditions, but the truth. If you're still reading this, maybe you're like I was. Tired, overlooked, told to stay quiet or stay useful. I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me. You are not a leftover. You are not past your prime. You are not done. You are a story still unfolding, and the most powerful chapters might still be ahead. So speak, stand, start. Because we're still here, and we're not going anywhere.